Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Esha Sar, Chief Advisor South Asia with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And very warm welcome and thank you for sparing time and listening to this panel today. Before we get into the topic of advanced recycling, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about what frameworks and enabling environments are required before we can get into the details, and I'm sure we have colleagues here who will talk about some of the technologies and so on in much more detail. And the focus of my presentation is going to be on the importance of value chain collaboration and collective intelligence that is required to create that enabling framework that advanced recycling needs before it can become a reality. Next slide, please. So what you see here in this graph, very simply, is a very stark reality. We talk about circularity. Advanced recycling is nothing but one of the ways to achieve circularity when it comes to plastics and polymers. But the reality is that as per this particular report, which was published in Davos at the WEF event earlier this year, our world is actually becoming less circular. So when you look at the quantity of secondary materials, materials that are derived from secondary sources, which is your circular material, so to speak, that were used in the economy over a period of time, you can actually see there's a negative trend rather than a positive trend. And one of the key challenges here is how do businesses or how does the corporate world actually help address this particular challenge? Because the circularity challenge is something that can only be achieved in coalitions. It's not a challenge that a company can achieve, can solve on their own. It's not a challenge that, within the boundaries of a company's activities, company can solve on its own, and which is the reason why this sort of a challenge really requires a collective effort, and it requires coalitions to come together to address it. Next slide. So when we talk about circularity as a challenge, it's really a public goods challenge. And a public goods challenge is something which is systemic. It is something which requires multiple actors in society, multiple stakeholders to solve together. And traditionally, if you look at what business is good at, business is very good at solving the me now challenges, because those are challenges that business can control. Those are challenges that pertain to your operations, operational efficiencies, improvements, etc., can help solve those me now problems. But the public goods challenges are essentially later and us challenges, and that is something that requires collective effort in solving, and the circular economy challenge really is a public goods challenge. It's a systemic challenge which requires cross value chain efforts, and we've heard in the Davos event as well, sustainability and leading business experts, for instance, from the company Lego, which makes kids' toys, say that we're more interested in speaking with and engaging with companies which are not in our sector but are in our value chain, rather than engaging with companies who are exactly like us, because that's where the learning potential exists. Next slide. But when we say it's a challenge, there is also an inherent economic opportunity therein. And this 120 billion USD is the quantum of economic opportunity that exists and that can be tapped into when you talk about the plastic waste issue. Next slide. If you look at India in particular, as per a report that came out last year, it was launched by Accenture, you can expect cumulatively value loss of about 133 billion USD by 2030 in India alone from packaging material which is not being brought back into a closed loop system. This could be because it's not getting collected, it could be because it's being incinerated and there is energy recovery but no material recovery, for instance, and a host of other factors. But it is a staggering 133 billion US dollars worth of value by 2030, and 2030 is not very far away, it's 7 years to go. And that is something that the industry can tap into when we can set the different pieces in motion for be it, collection and then sorting, and then ultimately coming to advanced recycling and advanced sorting technologies. Next. And this is a challenge that the Alliance to End Plastic Waste was founded to tackle. So the Alliance is really it's a laboratory, if you will, to address this particular public goods challenge of plastic waste in the environment. And when we were formed in 2019, it's a very young organization. 27 visionary companies across the plastics value chain came together and decided to create this entity, which would basically mobilize capital to de-risk solutions, which would then help the industry and help the world achieve circularity when it comes to plastics. Next slide. So the Alliance really is a do tank, and what this organization does is we help to identify, first of all, bankable projects, investable projects which have the replication potential, we believe has a scalability potential. And our sweet spot really is investments in projects which are at the cusp of the first large-scale commercialization and scale-up activities. And the role here is basically de-risking. So we de-risk technologies, we de-risk business models, all of which then ultimately help projects and help companies come to a place where commercial investors or more mainstream investors are then willing to come and invest in these companies. So that's the role of the Alliance, and of course mobilization of capital is also something that the Alliance looks at very clearly. Next. And how we do this? We do this by creating this collective intelligence across the entire plastics value chain. So we have across the table the resin producers who make the plastic, we have the converters who convert them into packaging, we have the brands who use that packaging, and we have the waste management companies who use that, recover it from the environment and convert it back into post-consumer resin or PCR. Next. And the strategy that we work with is really around the circularity gaps. This is very intuitive. There's no rocket science here, but it is important to understand that there are certain gaps which come in the way of achieving circularity when it comes to plastic waste management. And these gaps, again, very intuitively, it starts with the design gap, right? Whether your packaging is designed to be recyclable in the first place, whether it is designed to be recoverable in the first place. Then you have your quantity and your quality gap. So whether you have the recycled material that's going to be available in enough quantities to ensure that a plant can operate economically, and whether you have it at the quality that you require in terms of technical specifications that the plant would require. Then of course you have the alignment gap, because people need to speak to each other, right? So you need the waste managers and the brand owners and the converters and the resin producers to talk to each other, to understand what the issues are and what the challenges are, and so on and so forth. And last but not the least, data gap. We often find that decision making is severely constrained by the lack of data. I mean, even today, if you pick up 5 different reports, you get 5 very varying numbers, even for a simple metric as what is the quantity of plastic waste that India generates. And that's the kind of data gap, and the more deeper, the granular you go, the more issues you find when it comes to the data. So all these gaps are things that need to be broken down into more manageable pieces and need to be addressed. And the Alliance's strategy, when we think about our portfolio strategy and what it is that is required really to achieve plastic circularity, we try and invest in projects which address one or more of these gaps, sometimes multiple of these gaps together. Next slide. Again, I come back to what I said in the beginning. Before we talk about advanced recycling, so chemical recycling, for instance, the journey has to start with collection. We've burnt our own fingers. We've seen projects where, there's a fantastic technology and there's nothing wrong with the technology per se, but the project fails because the key aspect, which is feedstock, was something that was not looked at carefully enough when the project was conceptualized, because the whole collection piece is something which is not profitable. Collection is something that has to be incentivized. Collection by itself is not a profit making activity by large, unless it is accompanied by things like a tipping fee or landfill taxes, which we see in some of the developed economies and so on and so forth. But the point I'm trying to make here is that before we leapfrog 3 steps ahead to chemical recycling, for instance, we need to get on the curve and then we move up the curve. And along the way, we solve for the different circularity gaps, which will help us then become truly circular. Next slide. Just a couple of examples. When we talk about collection, for instance, the Alliance has a project with GIZ in the city of Haridwar, where we've looked at a pilot scale to begin with, but looked at the entire ecosystem. So right from household segregation, household collection, capacity building of the households, capacity building of the municipalities, because often the municipalities are very interested in doing a lot of good work, but there needs to be certain capacity building activities that take place, to make them aware of what are the useful technologies, what are the policy mechanisms that need to be put in place to make the system sustainable, for instance, so on and so forth. And we now have a material recovery facility that is functional, operational in the city of Haridwar, operated by Recycle, a waste management company. And there is also, discussions on how that offtake can help spur recyclers in that particular city, who can then convert the output from the MRF into recycled material. Next. Next. Can you just click till the end of the slide? One more? Yeah. So when we talk about feedstock, this is really the key for advanced recycling of any sort, be it advanced sorting technologies, be it advanced chemical recycling, waste to polymer technologies, and so on and so forth. And this is where we face multiple chicken and egg situations. If you don't have the quality of recyclate that you need to fuel recycling plant, you will be very hesitant to make the investments into the recycling. But if you don't have the pull from the recycling end of the chain, you will not invest in collection, because then, where is the offtake going to go? And if you don't invest in collection, you are not going to get the quality of recyclates that you need to then fuel the recycling facility. So essentially, you need to have economic incentives, and you need broad collaboration across the different stakeholder groups, which I keep coming to again and again, because the converter needs to understand what it is that the brand needs in terms of the packaging quality. Now, the brand also needs to understand what the constraints are when you incorporate recycled resin into the packaging, because your specs and your quality may not be exactly the same as it was for virgin packaging. And then your waste managers need to be feeding back to say, this is the kind of feedstock that we can provide, but at the same time they need feedback from the converters as to what is the quality, how do they need to build their supply chains, and how do they need to start accessing what types of material of what quality from the ecosystem and from the environment, and then what it is that they need to do to get there. So if we go to the next slide, the question then is that this is really a vicious cycle, and how do we sort of break this vicious cycle? Next slide. Can you keep on one more? Yeah. So here, our approach is basically through creating a value chain pool. And we break it down into 3 parts: define, demonstrate, and adopt. When we talk about defining, let's break it down very simply. I don't know how many people from the industry are here, but let's start by looking at what are those applications which have the ability to absorb the highest amount of recycled quantities. Then let's look at, for those applications, what is the quality of material or the quality of input that is required. Then let's look at what is the business as usual scenario for getting to that quality, and then what are the things that need to change. And that brings you at the end of the define phase to a point where you find the fit for purpose technologies which will help then reach the specs that you require for incorporating recycled content in those applications. Then in the demonstrate phase, it is all about, how do you demonstrate technological and economic viability at a commercial scale. What is it that you need? Do you need finance? Do you need offtake? Do you need technology? What it is that you need to be able to demonstrate that. And last but not the least is of course the adoption phase, where you then crowd in investments and you ensure that you have the cost versus value tipping point. You reach that tipping point by ensuring that the market adopts it, and thereby you get the economics of scale. On paper, it sounds very simple. It isn't, of course. It's much easier said than done. But this is the doing that one needs to do to address this already very complex system of plastic waste management and to reach plastic circularity. Next. 2 quick examples. Next slide. Please click again. Yeah. 2 quick examples of some of the work that's already out there, that we've put out there when it comes to talking about the quality of recyclate. So that is on both mechanical recycling and also on the quality from pyrolysis and chemical recycling. These publications are already there, publicly available for download, and this provides some good definitions to begin with and to start getting industry alignment on what is really required when it comes to advanced recycling in terms of the input material. Next. The last example is an example of advanced sorting technologies. This is a project called the Holy Grail Project, which is in partnership with the European Brands Association, or AIM. And in the first and second phases, there was industrial grade testing in an industrial, semi-industrial commercial setup of watermarks embedded in the packaging labels. So these are invisible to the naked eye, but they carry a wealth of information, including, food grade, not food grade, what is the source of the material. It can carry a whole bunch of information. And then when your sensors, the smart sensors, sense them through, when it runs through a plastic recycling facility, a PERF, or a material recycling facility, an MRF, that is when that digital information is read by the sensors, and it provides for very high degree of sorting. So when you want to move actually to food grade packaging, these are the kinds of advanced sorting technologies that are required to ensure that you get the quality of material really, which is, for instance, suitable for food grade recycled content in packaging. And again, there's a wealth of information available. So the Holy Grail project is now in phase 3, where in France, Germany, and Denmark, there's actually packaging on the shelves in supermarkets, and that packaging is being collected back through the waste stream and it's being sorted. And the hope is that more and more brands across the European market, to begin with, sort of adopt this technology to allow for much cleaner streams of recyclates coming through and then going into mechanical recycling, in this case of plastic waste. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for your time and hand over to Mr. Ghosh.